What do pilots even do during 9-hour flights? Besides monitoring instruments' weather, talking to ATC or taking sleep shifts, what do pilots do on transatlantic flights? I feel like it might get a little awkward in the cockpit when it's just the two of you for 10 hours, ha. Are you guys allowed to watch TV read? They're allowed to take naps one at a time, of course, while cruising. I assume they can also read a book or do a crossword or whatever too. That's not the important time. Things rarely go wrong at cruising altitude. Watch play something on my Steam Deck iPad. The long-haul flights have multiple sets of pilots, for example, one that handles the beginning and end of the flight and another that handles the middle part. The long-haul planes have rest compartments built into the plane with sleeping quarters for the resting pilots. I bet they shitpost on Reddit a lot. It's one of those jobs where they get paid the big for knowing stuff and being there when things aren't going well. A friend of mine is a pilot for BA and he just gets the plane to cruising altitude and plays Flight Simulator on his phone. My dad was a career military pilot. He said between takeoff, landing, and getting shot at, it was just being a glorified bus driver, except way more boring. And that was in the 60s, 80s when there was more to do manually. When he retired from the military, he became a flight instructor and briefly a medevac pilot, because they were more interesting before being grounded for health reasons rather than a commercial airline pilot, because he couldn't handle the boredom and lifestyle. Old joke: plane takes off and the pilot makes the usual announcement to passengers once they reach cruising. Then the pilot forgets to turn off the intercom, turns to the co-pilot and says, "What I could really do with more is a cup of coffee and a blow job." Back in the cabin, a flight attendant is horrified and starts running forward to the cockpit. An elderly lady passenger puts a hand out to stop her and says, "Honey, don't forget the coffee." So they're not playing Twister up there? Pilot here. I did some long flights over the Pacific and Indian Oceans when I was in the Air Force. There's downtime where you can just bullshit with the rest of the crew, but there's always something coming up. You still need to do ops checks, make position reports, navigate, keep an eye on the weather, and all that. Towards the end of the flight you have to plan your descent, review the approach plates, and there's normally more radio calls to make. Mostly piss about on YouTube and Reddit. Like my fellow minimally trained monkeys have said, even if the airplane is on autopilot in cruise, we're there for when things go wrong. Also, as many shiny screens as you might see if you peek in when you board, the average airliner has about as much processing power as a Game Boy. Maybe a DS. New business jets might be up to the power of an early iPhone. There's still plenty of pilot stuff to do even without having to manually operate the flight controls all the time. They do their 10-hour shift with nobody looking over their shoulder. I asked this to a buddy who flies C-17s, and with a straight face he said Netflix. I started laughing and he said, "No, I'm serious." Captain autopilot still on? First officer: yes. Captain: remember when we actually had to fly the plane? First officer: no, I'm not that old. Pilots don't earn their money when things are going well. They earn their money when things start to fuck up. I have a PPL, and flying aircraft at cruise when autopilot is set is easy. Now, when lights start to flash, systems tell you the wrong information, things stop working. That's when it gets hard. But in answer to the question, yeah, you can watch an iPad, take a switch, read a book, etc. Personally, I love when I'm near top of descent and everything starts to happen and you feel like you're actually flying the aircraft again. Play word games like People Who Should Have Been Enemies: Clint Eastwood and Vivienne Westwood, or Brian's of Britain: Brian May, Brian Cox, etc. Occasionally hide a lemon somewhere for the other pilot or crew to try to find. Normal pilot stuff. I was talking to a long-haul pilot, the one that goes non-stop Perth to London. He said, they take off and once they get to cruising altitude they complain about the airline, then after that they complain about the food, then they complain about the passengers, then a bit later on they complain about the flight attendants. Then they land. I've seen several videos on the internet, so it's got to be just give each other handy JS and BGs. I used coded language for the Perl clutches. Side question: when does the sterile cockpit rule end? My father was a pilot. He used his time at work to ignore his children, cheat on my mother, and start a second family. There's more than 2 people with 9-hour flights, and they each do a rotation out to either nap or hang out. I know quite a few pilots, and all of them are avid readers. It doesn't feel that long, time flies. Flight attendants. Talk about their impending divorce. It goes by quicker than some long domestic legs IMO. You have 3 segments for flights under 12 hours. The ones I do are usually 7-10. You have a segment with one person, one with a different person, then a break segment. Not to mention the most busy times when you're taxiing, taking off, or descending for your approach. So typically I'm with the same person for 2.5 hours or so. Sometimes even less, like 2 hours. Versus a domestic, I could be with the same person for 5 hours. Take turns jerking it for each other. There's literally nothing else they could be doing for that long. Kiss each other. Tickle fights. Wife of a pilot here. They eat and they talk. You'd be surprised and how much pilots have to say to each other. They are all aviation nerds, and they can talk about aviation for hours on end. Also, if it's a very long flight, there could be a 3rd or 4th pilot, so they do get to sleep. They jerk it. Monitor instruments, check weather, brief charts, etc. Porn. They take off their pants because the cockpit is too warm. Commercial airline pilots nap and watch movies. Read a book, listen to music. Headsets have Bluetooth, and it can be set to cut the music whenever ATC talks. Across the ocean we have a thing called CPDLC, which is essentially like texting, so we don't even talk to ATC at that point. If you're a wide-body crew, there's relief pilots who are in the bunk during takeoff. And about 2-3 hours in, they hop up to the flight deck to relieve the other flight crew, who go to their bunks and rest. Jerk off. Bitch about the company, union negotiations, their contract, crew scheduling, impending merger, and how they are supposedly underpaid. I work for a regional 121 US airline. I don't have anything near that length, but generally we are only allowed to read company-approved manuals and whatnot, but no one really adheres to this. Typically I pipe via Bluetooth some show into my headsets and watch that on the longer regional hops, or listen to music. Sometimes I read a good book. Pilots have been caught with naughty magazine before, but I am not sure that applies today. Read, talk politics, scroll the net. Netflix, eat, etc. Most crashes and incidents are a result of a series of failures in planning or execution of routine procedures that lead up to an incident, usually combined with bad weather where visibility is compromised. I read this in the Chap magazine. It sounds reasonable. On a modern aeroplane, if one were to enter the cockpit, one would find a pilot and a dog. The pilot's job is to feed the dog. The dog's job is to bite the pilot should he attempt to touch the controls. Kissing. Jack off. Masturbate. Watch a movie? Once you get up to altitude, your only real job is to make sure the autopilot doesn't do any 737 MAX type fuckery context. The 737 MAX had a problem where the autopilot wouldn't read the pitch correctly, so it would keep pointing the nose down and putting you into a death dive. They know each other. It's not like you're flying the plane with some rando ha ha ha. Flight attendants entertain us once they're done with food service. Okay. So in your scenario, taking all you've said to be truthful, you take out average student loans and work 7 weeks at 40 hours a week to get a high-paying job where you take naps at work.